Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of Don't Forget the Popcorn. Today, we will be discussing the greatest directors of all time. This list isn't my favorite directors of all time. These are who I think are the best and have contributed most to the art of cinema. The ones that have made pictures that have shaped culture, inspired newcomers, and stood the test of time over the years. The director is the most important part of a film. They drive the movie and guide it into the direction it needs to be to convey the message, emotion, and excitement that keeps us coming back for more. The vision and style of the director is what connects us to a film, even more so than your favorite actor you see on the screen. I have selected 10 directors. This is part 2 of the series. I'll be covering 5 through 1. If you haven't watched part 1, watch that first. It is linked down below. Before revealing number 1, we will have some honorable mentions. Now, let's get into the content. Number 5, Akira Kurosawa. Akira was born in Tokyo and started directing films during World War II. He discovered actor Toshiro Mifune, and they went on to make some of the best pictures of all time. Rashomon in 1950 put Kurosawa on the map, and he went on to make Akira in 1952. The Seven Samurai in 1954, one of my all-time favorites. Throne of Blood in 1957, Hidden Fortress 1958, another favorite. Yojimbo in 1961, High and the Low in 1963, another one of my favorites. And even expanding much later with Deruso Uzala in 1975 and Ran in 1985. Kurosawa's film has been remade and replicated many times. His movies have deep emotional connections through the characters, interesting twists and turns throughout the stories, and fun action. He has influenced many directors and it shows throughout the history of cinema. Kurosawa is easily one of my favorites of all time. Every time I watch a Kurosawa film, I either cry, cheer, or I'm stuck in deep thought in my head or wanting to talk to anyone who will listen about it. The Seven Samurai is one of the best movies ever made and even was an influence on the Jedis from Star Wars. Akira knows how to build a world that feels like you are there with these people in these periods he is portraying, struggling with them, laughing and crying. Only other filmmaker whose black and white films are this engrossing will be named later on this list. The best Akira Kurosawa films. The Seven Samurai, my personal favorite of his. This is the original story of teaming up, getting together, and fighting for a cause greater than oneself. The Seven Samurai is hilarious, very funny film that goes deep into the minds of those who are less fortunate. It shows the weakness and willingness to do anything to take care of what you need to survive. These people go out and fight for a cause greater than themselves. And the ending ultimately may leave you feeling sad and empty. But this film is a great ride throughout. It's long, but this epic will leave you laughing and crying all at once. Number 2, Hidden Fortress. This film is much more than the film that inspired Lucas to make Star Wars. Although, throughout cinema history, it's often just cited as that. This movie is epic. To me, this film is personally the original blockbuster. What he did in 1958 with these characters in black and white with limited technology is beyond amazing. You have a great story of a guy sent to protect a princess who goes on this grand adventure and they fight, laugh, and cry along the way until they ultimately get where they need to go. This film here could have sparked a major franchise. You can see it all over it. When you watch this film, you will know exactly where, how, and why George Lucas was inspired to make Star Wars. Number 3, The High and the Low. This film, breathtaking and emotionally gripping. Toshiro Mifune in this movie gives one of his best performances. I won't say it's my favorite of his, but it definitely struck me the hardest out of all the times I've seen this man perform on a screen. The way he can shift his moods and emotions so quickly is just so talented, it blows me away. This is a film about a guy who has to make a decision whether to save someone close to him's son who's being held for ransom. Now, this ransom isn't small, but as you go through this cat and mouse cop drama, you will be feeling so satisfied by the end. Guys, if you don't watch Kurosawa films, it is time to change that. If you're someone who doesn't like foreign language films, I think you should check out Kurosawa and he may give you a different perspective on them. Number 4, Stanley Kubrick. Kubrick was born in New York City, but spent his later years in England. He taught himself directing after high school. He started out making short films and then collaborated on 2 films with Kirk Douglas, Paths of Glory, 1957, and Spartacus, 1960. He released the classics with Peter Sellers, Lolita, 1962, and Doctor Strangelove, 1964, one of the funniest films ever made. He really revolutionized film and changed the game forever with the release of 1968's 2001 A Space Odyssey, which is widely considered one of the best films ever made. It influenced the world of sci-fi and still looks amazing to this day. He kept releasing classics with A Clockwork Orange in 71, one of my all-time personal favorites, Barry Lyndon in 1975, The Shining in 1980, Full Metal Jacket in 1987, and Eyes Wide Shut in 1999. Kubrick is a director's director. He has influenced many of the greats. All your favorite director's favorite director is likely Stanley Kubrick. Stanley Kubrick is not one of my favorite directors. He is incredible and has made some of my favorite films and made some of the absolute greats. There's just other guys I personally like more as directors. Having said that, I respect him more than any other director. I just love his approach to filmmaking and telling a story. He does not care what anyone thinks and puts out whatever he wants in his films. The best Stanley Kubrick films. Number 1, 2001, A Space Odyssey. This sci-fi movie here just changed everything. First thing, it looks amazing. For a film that came out in 1968, the ships in this movie, the set designs, the style of the way everything looks, the futuristic vibe is just so cool. The lights in this movie. Stanley Kubrick is known for his lighting in his films, and his lights represent a lot. The lighting in this movie is just breathtaking. It's a film where not a lot is said. There's not a ton of dialogue. There's a lot of dead silent space with beautiful images to keep you going. This film is hypnotic, it's trippy, it puts you in a trance. And when you get into the meat of what it's about, it's really an incredible story. A man versus machine tale that just gets a little out of hand, but it ultimately leads to something great. I can definitely see this film not being everyone's cup of tea because the first like 30 minutes and the last like 30 minutes are a little, they can be questionable to some average film watchers. But this film here is a spectacle in itself. Number 2, Clockwork Orange, my personal favorite. This film is based on the book of the same name, which I have not read. Do not judge me, but I don't want to read it because I saw this movie at a young age and I fell in love. And I've heard many times that the book will change my perception on this film, and I do not want that. This movie has a very interesting futuristic vibe to it. And you get one of the most interesting character studies with Alex DeLarge, a troubled teen who goes through doing rebellious acts that ultimately lead him on an interesting path where he needs to find himself, so to say. This movie here is just insane. This movie makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit uneasy. There's some graphic images in here, some fighting, some things that, might make your average watcher a little bit uncomfortable, but this film ultimately is so satisfying, so entertaining, and you get an excellent performance from Malcolm McDowell. Number 3, and this was really hard to pick because I almost took Doctor Strangelove, but I ultimately went with Eyes Wide Shut. And Eyes Wide Shut is a movie that came out in the great year of 1999, and it stars Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. They are married. Tom Cruise is a very successful doctor, and they have a very seemingly happy marriage with a loving child. But one night, Nicole Kidman reveals to him that she had a deep, deep fantasy of cheating on him, and it haunts this man as he goes through his daily life trying to cope with this news that he heard. And this movie here has so much going for it. You just follow Tom Cruise around for like 3 hours doing some of the most interesting things, meeting some of the most interesting people. And if you've seen the movie, you know the big thing that he goes through and what happens. But this movie, it's just so relaxing in a weird way. The lighting in it, it's a Christmas setting, and the lighting in this movie is just beautiful. It just relaxes you. And for whatever reason, when I watch Eyes Wide Shut, I just sit back and just feel good. It's a vibe to me. And I love movies like that. That's just me personally. And ultimately, the movie really amounts to nothing. Everything he goes through and everything that's going on, it really doesn't mean anything. The stakes aren't very high. It's really just interesting to see him going around and having these communications with certain characters. But Eyes Wide Shut is just one of those movies that after you watch it, you're like, man, that was awesome. Check that out if you haven't seen it. Number 3, Marty the Man, Martin Scorsese. Martin Scorsese was born and raised in New York, and it shows all over his films. His directorial debut came in 1967. Who's That Knocking at My Door? His 1973 film, Mean Streets, put him on the map. But Taxi Driver, one of the greatest films in existence, was his real coming out party in 1976. He has released some of the greatest films ever, with Raging Bull in 1980, The King of Comedy in 1982, Goodfellas in 1990, which by many publications is the greatest film ever made, and Casino in 1995. In the 2000s, he hit a second wave of his career when starting his collaborations with megastar Leonardo DiCaprio, releasing Gangs of New York in 2002, The Aviator in 2004, which, in my opinion, is one of the best and most underrated Scorsese pictures with one of the best DiCaprio and Cate Blanchett performances. The Departed in 2006, which is another masterpiece, Shutter Island in 2010, and Wolf of Wall Street in 2013. Scorsese is known for his mafia films with heavy violence, funny and witty dialogue, and the depiction of culture within certain societies and time periods. Well, Martin Scorsese would probably be my second favorite director. I love this man so much. He's super charismatic and just seems like a great guy to work with. He often lets his actors improvise and do their own thing, often resulting in some of the best moments in cinema history. This man knows how to paint the exact picture he wants you to see with his movies. There isn't too much to wonder. He's cut and dry, taking you on a ride where you know exactly what's going on, who you like, and who you don't. His films have personally inspired me greatly, and his elegance and love for film is something to admire. This man was honestly hard not to put at number 1, but 1 and 2 I think are explainable, and that would just be bias on my end. The best Martin Scorsese movies. This was so hard to pick just 3, but number 1, Taxi Driver. I really can't say this is my favorite Martin movie, and I don't even know if I can name my favorite Martin movie, but Taxi Driver is one of those really trance like hypnotic films that puts you in a mood, it straps you in, and then it takes you on a wild ride. But while all of this insanity is happening going on, the score and visuals of this movie just keep you stuck in this hypnotic state that keeps you so mellow, although so much insane stuff is happening on the screen in front of you. Robert De Niro transforms into Travis Bickle, and it takes you on a character study that psychologically makes you think you are kind of crazy yourself. Travis's character is this rigid guy who you just really don't know whether he's stable or not. And just when you think he's completely at his end, He does some crazy stuff and makes you think differently about him. And the way the movie ends is just absolutely perfect. I love the way it ended. And Taxi Driver is one of those films I can put on whenever and watch it. I could put it on while I'm falling asleep. I could put it on while I'm working. I can just sit down and watch it. It does not matter. It is one of those films that just is perfect for any mood and setting. Make sure you watch Taxi Driver if you haven't. Number 2, Goodfellas. Now, Goodfellas, I had to put it at 2 because of the cultural and pop culture impact it's had on society over the years. And this movie is still talked about every day. I absolutely love this movie. This movie is amazing. It's so funny. It's one of the most quotable Scorsese movies. Am I funny to you? Do I look like a clown? There's just tons of quotes in this movie that you can just go on and on about. The score is absolutely amazing. The 3 leads are perfect, between Ray Liotta, rest in peace, Joe Pesci, and Robert De Niro. These 3, their chemistry is amazing. You feel like you're watching 3 real homeboys hang out and do some mafia gangster stuff. All right, Goodfellas it's that movie. It really is. You can't go wrong with it. You can put it on anytime. You're gonna laugh. Your jaw's gonna drop. Just go get your effing shine box. Like, if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. Goodfellas is absolutely amazing. All right. Number 3, and this one's probably gonna be controversial, but hear me out. The Aviator. Now, like I said earlier, The Aviator to me is just the most underrated Scorsese movie. And don't get me wrong, it made money, of course. It got all the Oscar attention. I think Leonardo should have won Best Actor for this. This should have been his first Oscar, not The Revenant. That's me personally. Kate Blanchett did win, which was well deserved. She played Katharine Hepburn so well. When you first see her on the screen and she's acting, you're like, I don't know. Especially if you're a Katharine Hepburn fan, because I'm a Katharine Hepburn fan. But as she goes on, you forget you're watching Kate Blanchett. You're like, Katharine Hepburn literally filmed this movie, and made herself 40 years younger. It's just insane the way she just melts into this character. And Leonardo's character with the OCD tactics and the way he thinks and the way his mind works and the insecurities, it's one of the most vulnerable yet confident characters I've ever seen in a film, and it works so well. You cannot go wrong with this performance from Leonardo. He makes this movie. And on top of the performances, the movie is just cool. You get to see these cool flying sequences, and there's one of the craziest plane crash scenes you'll ever see that's going to have your mouth open. The colors in this movie, the cinematography is just excellent. This movie does not get talked about enough. It's such a fun film. It's a fun ride, and like, by the end, you feel like you've been flying a plane yourself, for 3 hours. And people who haven't seen this movie, don't get off put by the title. This isn't a movie about a pilot, okay? This is a character study about a guy who is going mentally crazy, all right? Guys, please watch The Aviator if you haven't. It is excellent. All right, guys, let's get into our intermission. First things first, if you're enjoying this content, guys, would appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe. Down below, got the links to my TikTok and Instagram. Go ahead and follow me if you want. I post a lot of clips on TikTok that are fun, interesting to debate about. I have a streaming recommendation for you. And today's streaming recommendation, I'm going to relate it to one of our directors, someone I already discussed, not to give anything away. Akira Kurosawa's Hidden Fortress, streaming on HBO Max, 1958. Guys, I talked about this a little bit earlier. It's starring Toshiro Mifune. This movie is great. This movie is awesome. It is the original blueprint of a blockbuster. It's a fun samurai adventure movie where you got to save the princess. And guys, this movie has inspired so much. It inspired more than just Star Wars. This movie is more than just the movie that inspired Star Wars. Yes, Star Wars is amazing, but this film here is amazing on its own right, and it has its purpose in film history, and it deserves to be talked about as more than just the movie that inspired a different movie. This movie is epic. It's awesome. And for what Kurosawa got done with this film in 1958 is just breathtaking. Guys, it starts a little bit slow, kind of like A New Hope does, but as it gets into it, it gets great. Check that out on HBO Max if you got it. You will not be disappointed. Now, let's get back into the content. Number 2, Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock, the master of suspense, was born in England. Hitchcock had a career spanning over 6 decades. His directorial debut came in 1925 with the silent film The Pleasure Garden. He started gaining international success in the 30s with the films The 39 Steps and The Lady Vanishes. He followed up in the 40s with some of his early classics, including Rebecca, 1940, Foreign Correspondent, 1940, Suspicion, 1941, Shadow of a Doubt, 1943, one of his best films, and Notorious, 1946, another one of his best films. Hitchcock really came into form in the 1950s, releasing some of the best films of all time and some of the most influential. He released Strangers on a Train, 1951, Dial M for Murder, 1954, Rear Window, 1954, Vertigo, 1958, one of my all-time favorite movies. It is so good. North by Northwest, 1959, and started the 60s with the horror classic Psycho in 1960. The Hitchcockian style is one of the most influential. He is known for the dolly zoom, an in-camera effect that appears to undermine normal visual perception. He used these shots to maximize suspense and fear. Hitchcock's camera work is some of the best of all time. He really used the camera to portray his messages and strike a certain mood within the viewer. Hitchcock is one of the most celebrated and studied filmmakers ever, and his influence is still very present in today's filmmakers. Oh, Hitchcock. One of the filmmakers who sparked my love and curiosity for film. I watched Psycho and the Birds as a kid with my mom, and I never forgot those films. Alfred is absolutely in my top 5 personal favorites. The level of suspense this man can convey with just the movement of the camera is mind blowing. Just watch the movie Rope, and you'll know exactly what I mean. Hitchcock's films are a mystery throughout, often leaving the viewer to try and figure out what's really happening or who done it. His films have often been cited as having a slice of cake because of the layering throughout them. Hitchcock offers a hypnotic and intoxicating experience when viewing his films, especially on first viewing. They leave the watcher in a trance-like experience all the way until the end. The best Alfred Hitchcock films. Vertigo, my personal favorite of his, and probably in my top 10 favorite movies ever. This movie, when I first saw it, my jaw was pretty much hanging the whole second half. The themes of this movie are obsession, control, manipulation, fear, deception. Oh, this movie is just so incredible. This film, it takes you on a ride, it makes you think something, and then totally drops you on your head. It flips you upside down. This is one of the most hypnotic experiences I've ever had watching a film. It makes you feel like you are on drugs. This movie here, it explores the human psyche and the mind and breaks down what it takes to make one happy. And it shows the fear of loss. It shows the fear of not getting what you want, and it shows the lengths that someone will go to obtain something they feel is perfect. And my lord, the acting in here between Jimmy Stewart and Kim Novak are it's just incredible. And Kim Novak, she looks amazing in this movie. Guys, I could go on and on about Vertigo. Just watch it if you haven't, and give it a chance. Just give it a chance. Number 2, Psycho. Psycho, Come on, man. It's the horror film that really got the genre started. It's the one that influenced it all. It sparked the slasher, you know. Psycho is one of the most influential films ever for great reason. Psycho is still better than most horror films that come out today. It is an interesting I'm gonna call it a character study on Norman Bates, all right, who was brilliantly played by Anthony Perkins. This movie it showed the first toilet flush. You know, the blood isn't blood, it's chocolate, but it looks like blood. It works. Hitchcock made the most of this film with very little. You know, there's not a lot going on in this film. This film isn't grand like the next film I'm going to talk about on this list. This movie, it's intimate and close, but the acting, the story, the pacing, it keeps you on edge. And it has one of the best twist endings of all time. It's got probably the best twist up until The Empire Strikes Back, when you find out Luke is, you know, the son of Darth Vader. It's a crazy twist, because when I first watched this movie, I did not at all see the twist coming. Maybe some of you did. Now, I was pretty young when I first saw it, but man, I didn't see it. It blew me away. Guys, this movie is absolutely amazing. Psycho, know your roots. Know your roots. Go watch Psycho if you haven't, guys. And number 3, North by Northwest. This is Hitchcock's blockbuster type of movie. This was his big, large-scale, grand film. I mean, he shot an action sequence on Mount Rushmore in this movie. He's got Cary Grant doing some big stunt work. These guys are having a blast making this film. This film, it's just an adventure movie at the end of the day. It's one of those movies about mistaken identity, people looking for the wrong guy, and there's just crazy adventures throughout. There's a scene where an airplane is flying low, and that scene is so intense, and you're just like, holy crap, the whole time. This film here is breathtaking, especially for 1959. When this movie came out, I couldn't imagine going to the theaters to see this back then. I would have been blown away. I would have felt like my money went to the right place. You get a great performance from Cary Grant. You get some great direction from Hitchcock, some killer camera work as usual. And, you know, he went big scale with this and took a huge risk. You know, this feels like like the early comings of a Speilberg type of movie or something like that. So, guys, make sure you watch North by Northwest if you haven't. All right, we got 10 honorable mentions before we get into our number 1 greatest director of all time. Paul Thomas Anderson, Ridley Scott, Wes Anderson, Ingmar Bergman, Orson Welles, Charlie Chaplin, Billy Wilder, Federico Fellini, David Fincher, and Robert Altman. And our number 1 greatest director of all time. You guys probably saw this coming, but Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg was born in Ohio and grew up in Phoenix. He is one of the new Hollywood era directors. Steven Spielberg is the most financially successful director of all time, but that is not why he is number 1 on this list, even though there is something to be said about that in itself. Spielberg directed The Sugarland Express in 1974 and released the mega hit and started the current summer blockbuster model with Jaws in 1975, which is one of the greatest and most suspenseful films ever made. He changed the sci-fi game with Close Encounters of a Third Kind in 1977, one of the best of the genre, and E.T. in 1982, which overtook Star Wars as the highest grossing film at that time. He started and directed the Indiana Jones series starting in 1981. He revolutionized visual effects in film with his 1993 release of his sci-fi masterpiece, Jurassic Park. He overtook his own record of E.T. as the highest grossing film of all time and displayed some of the coolest and most realistic dinosaurs we'd ever seen on screen. The effects in the film still hold up today and look better than some of the computer-generated images we see in today's films. In that same year of 93, he released one of the dramatic classics and utterly heartfelt Holocaust films, Schindler's List. In 1998, he released one of the best war films of all time with Saving Private Ryan. This film has some of the best sequences of war I've ever seen up until 2016's Hacksaw Ridge. His career continued to flourish in the 2000s and 2010s with the release of Catch Me If You Can, AI, Minority Report, The War of the Worlds, Adventures of Tintin, Lincoln, Ready Player One, and The West Side Story. There are so many Spielberg movies spreading over pretty much every genre in film through the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s. Not only is his catalog diverse, it's exceptional. His films are very entertaining, very detail-oriented, and often taking risks with his films, being the first to do many things in movies, and being one of the only directors to pull off some of the things he's done. His style is the spectacle that his films are. They are very large and grand scale experiences that not many directors can pull off. You know what you can expect from a Spielberg film, but ultimately, you can expect to be fully entertained, feeling like it was time well spent watching his movie. The impact his films have had on cinema is undeniable, and that is why he is number one. I love Spielberg movies, but he isn't one of my personal favorite directors. I think he is one of the best to do it, but one thing about Spielberg that has missed me is the authentic emotions that I personally crave in films, with some exceptions like Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, and The Color Purple. Still, I can't deny this body of work and the range and risks that he has taken to give us some of the visually stunning masterpieces that we get to see. When I think of Steven, I think we are going to have fun, leave with a smile, and always know I'll likely see something in the film I've never seen before. This may seem like a cliche answer, but cliches are that for a reason. The best Steven Spielberg films. This was so hard. There are just so many films and so many great ones, but I had to do it, so here we go. Number one, Jaws. Not my personal favorite, but it is his number one. Because first things first, it was his first big film. It kicked off the summer blockbuster model that is still used today. Popcorn flick. Jaws was the one that did it, at least in American cinema. The way that the score is used to convey suspense in this movie is just mind-blowing. This movie has you on edge. When you first watch this movie, you're going to be sitting there just waiting to get eaten by a shark. The whole movie, you're just waiting to get eaten by a shark. Even when it's a moment in the film where you're supposed to feel safe, you just never know when he's going to pop up. You're so scared. You're terrified. It's such good work. And the shark kept breaking down and, it wasn't working, but they figured out a way to make it possibly even more scary without the use of the shark so much. And with that, Steve made one of the best movies ever. I love Jaws. Not my personal favorite, but I love Jaws. Definitely deserves its spot as one of the best movies ever made. Number two, Close Encounters, the Third Kind. This is my personal favorite Spielberg movie. And the reason I like this movie is because, one, I love sci-fi films, and it's a cool sci-fi movie, and the concept is great. Something getting into your mind that you can't shape. And this encounter, first of all, we get one of the best performances from Richard Dreyfuss. And this encounter gets into this man's head, and it takes him on an emotional journey that just tears you apart and breaks you down. You feel so bad for this guy. He's losing everything, and it's not his fault. It's all because of what's happening around him. And it's the perfect movie to show you what your life can turn into when your mind is consumed by one thing and one thing only. And this film is just fun. It's so fun. And when I saw the film, I'd seen other sci-fi films, I'd seen it later in my life, but when I saw it, it just felt like nothing else. It felt like I had seen nothing like it before. And it's got one of the coolest shots ever. If you've ever seen the movie, the scene where, I don't want to give too much away, but there's a scene where a kid opens a door and you see an orange light shine through the house. And if you've seen this movie, you know exactly what shot I'm talking about. That shot, when I first saw that, I would have loved to have seen my own face because I probably looked like a kid in a freaking candy store. It was just visually stunning. It was amazing. It's one of those shots, reminds me of the shot in 1917 where I don't want to, let me not get into anything else. We'll talk about 1917 another day, but Close Encounters of a Third Kind, my favorite movie from Spielberg. Guys, watch it. It's so cool, so entertaining. And, we've seen a lot of movies since then like it. It's been a heavy influence. Number 3, Saving Private Ryan. And this one was hard to pick because number 3 could have been so many other things. If Steven Spielberg had actually directed The Goonies, that would have probably been number 3. But he didn't. So we're going with Saving Private Ryan. One of the coolest and most graphic war films ever. The first 30 minutes of this movie are just wow. Nothing like it I've ever seen in a war film. And it took almost 20 years for me to see anything even close. And I think the only thing that comes close is Hacksaw Ridge in 2016. The sequences of war in this film alone are to marvel at the movie, but we get incredible performances from a great ensemble cast, all led by the legendary Tom Hanks, who gives one of the best performances of his career. And this movie, as you're going along, if you know what the movie's about, they're trying to get to this guy, Ryan, who is going home because of a situation that happened with his brothers, and they want to send him home. So there's a team sent out to find him, and, they keep getting closer and closer, but as they go on, they're beginning to resent things, and they're beginning to feel a certain type of way. But when you get to Ryan and you see everything that happens, it just turns your heart around. It makes you feel a certain way. It puts you in a mindset and makes you think about war in a different way. It's one of those films that leaves you thinking long after you watched it. And everything on it is clicking on all cylinders. How this movie lost to Shakespeare in Love for Best Picture is just the biggest robbery probably in Oscar history. But no one talks about Shakespeare in Love, and we still talking about Saving Private Ryan, guys. This is a great film, one of the best from Spielberg. Check it out if you haven't. Guys, that is my list. The greatest directors of all time. I really hope you enjoyed it. I put a lot of time in these for you. Please comment below. Give me your top 10 greatest directors of all time. Tell me your favorite. Give me your top 3, whatever. I'm very interested to hear. Let's get the conversation started, guys. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel. And always, don't forget the popcorn.